Dass Sie Bruder sagen können, Sie haben einen freundlichen Wiener.
Was warst du jetzt?
Ich habe jetzt den Workshop-Raum fertig gemacht und Vanessa verkauft. Dass wir die da haben. Mich anrufen, wenn es nächstes Mal wieder aktuell wird, weil damit er wieder kommen kann und damit IBM ja wieder dabei ist. Gut, oder?
Bitte?
Diese Bestattung jetzt machen.
Was auf? Ja? Hast du gesehen, wo es da was denn?
Ja, mach ich gleich.
Sie haben ungefähr, ich glaube, dreimal so viel Leute drinnen, wie sie erwartet haben.
noch mehr dort.
Das war Philipps Vortrag. Das soll wohl alle sein Workshop, seines Workshops teilhaftig werden.
Der ist auch spitze.
Ich habe schon wieder gesagt, das ist der Instrumentfänger von Hammersbach.
Die Mehrheit XML kennen. Denkt der Philipp eh daran?
Nein, ich glaube, der hat auch sein Baby.
Damit rechnet, dass das Projekt zu einem Ziel kommt.
Ja.
Ja, was haben wir? Hallo? Hallo? Na? Was ist?
Das wollte ich eine Sache machen. Wir haben uns das nicht auf die Fahne gestellt, weil es so sein muss, sondern aber es ist nichts Reduktion gar nichts.
Ja, Telefon.
Sorry, dass mir das nicht eingefallen ist mit dem Little Money. Ich glaube, das war organisiert und mir ist dann eingefallen. Oh, scheiße, haben wir das eigentlich auch mit berücksichtigt?
Nein, das passt schon.
Weil in die finanziellen Sachen waren nämlich nur die Natalie und die Luga involviert und ich war nicht im CC drin. Und das wird nicht mehr gewusst. Und dann ist mir eingefallen, hoppala, das könnte irgendwie ein Punkt sein, den wir vergessen haben könnten. Und in die finanziellen Deals, die Natalie mit der Luga ausgehandelt hat, war ich nie im CC drinnen. Alles, wo Cash geflossen ist, war ich nicht involviert.
Ja, nein, ist kaputt.
Da wäre vielleicht bei der
Yes, don't you worry much about having to look down for journalists. No, I just want you to clear this Monday.
Okay, we'll do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I see the topic because podcast.
Yes, she told me. I just said to her.
It's 5:30 officially.
Yes, there's something. Yes, this is when we are created this to something one thing. Yes, right. I expected something classical now. This is classical. Well,
Originaltext 2 zurückfließen lassen werden, oder das ist jetzt noch nicht klar. Aber jedenfalls, wir werden es, sobald es soweit fertig ist, werden wir es auch selber auf unserer Homepage dann anbieten, das Ding. Also verfügbar werden wird es auf jeden Fall. Ja, dann, das war jetzt einmal die Spalte. Ich habe da jetzt nochmal eine sehr einfache Variante genommen, die eben einfach nur eine Liste von Menüpunkten hat. Wenn man sich anschaut, wie die Linux XML Homepage funktioniert mit. Im Tourverzeichnis oder die Unterverzeichnisse? So. DB-Tour mit großem D. Aber im Limit.
The cool thing about the second part is that now it's just machine learning, because this feature extraction step is an abstraction. So I can just use some kind of machine learning library and use that one for classification. In my case, I used something called VCAP, and I used k-nearest neighbor classification. As I said, the data items that I have, the features I calculated, can be seen as points in n-dimensional space. And what I do is I just see, okay, what other points are close to my new point, and then I just use that label. There's a very cool graphics that I made on the train to Vienna with 5 4-year-old children playing in the same compartment. But, for instance, these are classical sounds, these are dance tracks, and these are metal. Now I have a new one, and I don't know what it is, but I calculate the feature representation. And then I say, okay, if I look around what's close to that, I see I have 3 of the metal thingies and 1 of the classical thingies. So I say, well, chances are that this one is metal. That's just a common approach. It's called k-nearest neighbor classification, and it's ancient. It's from, I don't know, 1960s. Yeah, and it works. I've tested it. I have 3 genres, which is metal, dance, and classical. I used 189 test sounds, and I got a classification of accuracy of 88.36%, which is kind of good if you compare it with other people that have tried similar stuff. And that's basically because I make very few assumptions. I think a lot of part of the reason why it works is that I use k-nearest classification, which doesn't assume anything about the distribution of the data. And that's basically it. This is the magret, which is the logo. I would like to finish with a sentence, a quote by Von Tabak. Information is not knowledge, knowledge is not wisdom. Wisdom is not truth, truth is not beauty, beauty is not love, love is not music, music is the best. More information about this project, the full source code, the thesis I've written about it, and other uninteresting stuff probably can be found on my website, which is carrot.net/magret. Source code will be there in 2 weeks after I have changed all the 1-character variables into meaningful names. Or maybe 2.5 weeks. I think it's more than 1 character. Actually, I also have 2-character variables because after a while I ran out of. Yeah, I don't know how much time do I have left.
-2 minutes.
Oh wow, cool. So I can give you a short demonstration. So here's the sound, which is wonderful, but I'm not sure if you can hear it. I don't know if the acoustic is good enough. Oh, this is going to be some awesome quality. Okay, now if you have to decide what it is, classical or metal or dance, and it's going to be clear for some of you that this is a classical song. Now those people, please get some coffee. Maybe think for a moment, how did you know that? Whatever you came up with, how did you come up with it? Now, wait a second. I cannot show you the feature extraction part because I was too lazy to port it to macOS 10. It's only running on GNU Linux. But I can show you what the output of it is, which is the feature file. The first part here is uninteresting, that's just a header. An interesting part is this here, which is the data section. You have 15 values, and then you have the last thing, which is the class label. In my case, it's unclassified because I haven't assigned anything yet. I mean, the computer doesn't know anything about it, except that it doesn't know what it is. And believes that it is. So obviously it's wrong now because we had a classical song, but it makes the same mistake as me because I also thought it was dance. The next number, which is this long thingy, is the confidence of the system in its own classification. And this one's in here because sometimes you have songs that are borderline cases, like between metal and classical. So you can see here how strong does the system believe that this is really true what it says, or would it bet on it, and how much would it bet? And the last thing is the known genre, which was unclassified, and that's basically for debugging. So this is how far I got. Of course, the next step is going to be to make, so I want the computer to do it for me. That's going to be the next step in the project. And that's basically it. I mean, I know it's, I don't know if this was at least half clear for people who didn't know this before, because that's always the most interesting thing. Of course, I'm also accepting hardware donations, but that's not very likely anyway. I know I've had this before. And I would like to say thanks to everybody who has supported me in this project by feedback and saying that it's never going to work, and also explaining why they think it's not going to work, because that helped me a lot. So thank you very much, and enjoy linuxwochen.
Eine dringende Durchsage, der Herr Hannes Dorn bitte an das Rednerpult.
Copying that, modifying that, and redistributing it competitively with me. That's not something that normally happens. What normally happens is when people want to make a change to a project, they don't redistribute modified copies. Instead, they take a copy of the current version, they make modifications, and then they send those modifications back to the maintainers, who have a privileged role in the system that is not reflected anywhere in the licenses. So on the one hand, we have this sort of formal ideology expressed in the licenses, and anyone can modify anything at any time. And on the other hand, we have this practice in which there are groups with distinguished roles through which, for any project, any live project, all changes are funneled. So I said, okay, that's an interesting contradiction. That seems to be exactly the sort of thing that the books on anthropological fieldwork were telling me I ought to try to notice. So what would a real anthropologist, instead of a dumb amateur like me, do at this point? And the answer was fairly obvious. The role of maintainer of a project constitutes a kind of ownership. Okay? So the next challenge any anthropologist would pick up on is discover what the rules of ownership are. So I looked, and I found that there seemed to be 3 ways that you could acquire ownership of an open source software project. One is to be the original founder of the project. Another is to have the current owner of the project give you that project, hand over control to you. It's significant in some of the things that I'll get into a little bit later that such transfers of ownership are public events. They're things that people announce, okay, which suggests that there's a perception behind that behavior that the entire community must witness the transfer of ownership because they have a stake in it. The third way to acquire ownership of a piece of software is by noticing that a project which you need to make changes in doesn't seem to have an active maintenance group. So, under those circumstances, custom permits you to poke your head up in an appropriate news group or other forum and say, nobody's working on Project Foo, and there are some bug fixes I want to fold in, some changes I want to make. So, is anyone else working on this? And then you wait. Okay? You get style points for waiting longer, and you also get style points for announcing in more different channels. What you're trying to do is create the maximum, you need to be seen to create the maximum opportunities for somebody to come forward with one of two responses. Either, yeah, we're the existing maintenance group, we've been asleep for a while, but we're still here, and now that we've got your patches, we'll put out another release. Or, you might get a response that says, the original maintainers seem to have been disappeared, but I've been hacking on this code for 4 months, and I'm just about to put out a release, so you can just send me your changes. If you get neither of these responses, custom permits you to poke your head up again after 60 to 90 days or so and say, well, nobody else is working on Project Foo, I've got some stuff to do, I'm taking it over, send your patches to me now. Now that is the least secure way to acquire ownership of a piece of software because you're sort of vulnerable to challenge if the original maintenance group pops up and says, wait a second, this is our code, which you can have a nice little messy civil war with lots of flames. But once I had noticed these 3 different ways of acquiring ownership of a piece of software, it struck me that I had seen these rules before in a different context. And I thought about it for a while, and I realized what they were. And this is one of the few countries outside the United States where this is relatively easy to explain, actually. It would be much harder in France. Because the rules that these 3 are logically almost isomorphic to are the Anglo-American Germanic system of common law land tenure. Did I just throw everybody for a loop there? Okay, most of you aren't students of legal history. So I'll tell you what the 3 rules of Anglo-American land tenure are, which are originally derived from Germanic common law, and I think that system of land title still obtains in Germany and Austria, I'm not sure. The 3 rules of common law land tenure are that you acquire ownership of a piece of land in one of the following 3 ways. You can homestead some land. That is, you need to go out to an area where there's a whole bunch of land nobody owns yet. This hasn't been a real possibility in Europe for at least 3,000 years. But bear with me, okay? So, it happened in the U.S. as recently as the end of the last century. You could go out and find a chunk of unowned land on the frontier somewhere and put a fence around it and defend title. Okay? By defending title, I mean if somebody else comes out there and tries to homestead the same piece of land, put a fence around it, you say, "Hi there, here's my fence, here's my shotgun, have a nice day." Defending title is actually really important because the requirement that you defend title is what prevents people from claiming pieces of land much larger than they can use, much larger than they can defend. So that's the first way to acquire ownership of a piece of land. The second way is by transfer of title. And that consists of going to the person, you find a piece of land that looks like it's owned, it has improvements on it, property on it, maybe there's somebody living on it, and you decide, well, I think that piece of land is really neat, and I'm willing to trade my peppercorns or my pile of coins or my furs or whatever for it. And you go to the person who owns the land and you say, hey, can we do a trade here? And if that person agrees, then that person gives you a deed, which is a document that is the near end of a chain of transfers of title that theoretically, ideally, you want to be able to go back all the way to when the land was homesteaded. Not that that's possible in Europe either. In common law land tenure systems, land title registries are really important, which are just big buildings full of deeds that document transfers of title back into the dim and dark and backward abysm of forgotten time. The third way to acquire ownership of a piece of land is called, in English it's called adverse possession. I don't know what the German term for it is. Do you? Ah, okay. Okay.
This is like sitting down and staying there.
Right.
Because you think you have the right to.
Yeah, in vernacular.
Is it possible to do that? Like, is this a legal?
It's not as easy as Eric described. Obviously, in Anglo-American law, because you need title to. The title is valid, and you sit there for 30 years, not just 30 days.
Well, the traditional period. The traditional period in Anglo-American law is 7 years and a day.
7 years a day.
Yeah.
So here it's 30 years.
Okay.
And you need a title.
You need also a title, but if the title is invalid, because the contract was for some reason invalid, or the other one was not the owner who transferred it to you, you have to have good belief.
Right. Yeah.
You have to have good belief and the 30 years sitting on the land.
So okay, so you do still have a common law land tenure system here, because that's.
Yes, that's basically right.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so in the
I
Anglo-American.
have to come back to this later.
Okay, so in the German version it's 30 years, in the Anglo-American version it's classically 7 years and a day. That if you find a piece of land that looks like it should be owned, but nobody's living on it, you can't identify an owner, you can move on to it, and the English vernacular for this is squatting on land. And then you defend the title just as if you homesteaded it, and you can defend it from anybody except somebody who runs up to the edge of the property saying, wait a second, I'm the owner and I have a deed. Okay? But after 7 years, the owner's claim on the land times out. And you acquire title just as though title had been transferred to you. So I asked myself the question, why is it that the rules that seem to customarily govern the handling of maintainership, of ownership in open source projects are logically almost indistinguishable from the rules for land tenure? This is really actually kind of puzzling because land and software are very different kinds of commodities. Okay? For one thing, land is tangible, software is not. Land is what economists call a rivalrous good. Any German economists in the crowd can translate this. A rivalrous good, I can't take a piece of land and give you a copy that's just as good as the original. And the third difference is that while the stock of available land is finite, they ain't making any more of this stuff aside from marginal cases like the Dutch. On the other hand, and the Japanese too, they're polders. On the other hand, the stock of software almost, well, it seems kind of infinite, especially when you're trying to get work done. So at least it's, well, okay, it's actually very large but finite, but there's very little difficulty creating more software in the way that there is creating more land. So these are commodities with very, very different economics. So why do they have the same, I'll say this word, even though it's not formally law, why do they have the same legal structure? Why is the law of land tenure and the customs of the open source community so similar? In order to address this question, we need to go to the more general question of why human beings have property systems at all. Okay? Because the thing is, you can look at society as a sort of adaptive machines. A society is a mechanism that assists people in adapting to a particular niche in the environment. And when you see extremely parallel customs in two societies, then it is at least a reasonable guess that they're solving the same adaptive problem. Which suggests that we might be able to get insight into the question of why is it that hacker ownership customs work the way they do by addressing the more general question of why land tenure works the way it does, and why we have property systems at all. And I was kind of stuck in trying to understand this until I remembered something that a friend of mine had told me years before. He said, have you ever noticed that your dog knows where your property is? If you have a dog and you move somewhere, that dog will very quickly acquire from the behavior of human beings a representation in his head of where the property lines between you and your neighbor are. And you'll know the dog has that representation because it'll bark when a human being crosses them. Okay? So the interesting question is, why there seems to be some sort of homology, there seems to be a correspondence between human notions of land property and dog notions of territoriality that is so powerful and so exact that even something as stupid as a dog can notice it. Now later on I'm going to explain why it's kind of unfair to refer to dogs as stupid. They're actually smarter than a good many human political theorists. I'll get back to that. But there's something about human property that your dog understands, and that's really interesting because your dog can't read. Your dog doesn't know about homesteading. Your dog doesn't know about transfer of title. Your dog doesn't know about any of this stuff, and yet they managed to develop a good working model of human property, which suggests that in order to answer the question, why do humans have property, we might get a good clue from asking the question, why do dogs have territoriality? Now we have come to a question for which there is a well-known answer, which any evolutionary biologist will tell you. It has to do with the problem of being a member of a predator species where you've got a whole bunch of aggressive, say you're a wolf, okay? You're in a situation where there are a whole bunch of wolves around you, okay? And you're all competing for the same resources. You all need a certain amount of biomass every day to keep your wolf thing going. So, you have a problem because if wolves are just sort of wandering randomly around on the landscape, they're going to bump into each other and competing for the same resources. They're going to bump into each other, and when they bump into each other, because they're competing for the same resources, they're going to fight. Now, in a state of nature, fighting is an extremely risky proposition. You don't have bandages, you don't have sulfa drugs, you don't have civilization, you're just a wolf for Christ's sakes. Okay? The very smallest wounds can easily become septic and kill you or severely injure you or make you weak for a long time. And that reduces your chance of reproducing, which is the name of the game. Okay? So there are powerful selective incentives for predator species to develop rules that minimize conflict within the species. Okay? It's not true of all predators, actually. We have to make a distinction here. There are fierce predators and there are predators that are not fierce. A fierce predator is one such that the normal natural armament of an adult member of the species can seriously injure or kill another member of the species. Wolves are fierce predators. Human beings are fierce predators. Box turtles are not fierce predators. Okay? Box turtles don't need territoriality because they don't have this problem. Well, territoriality is what keeps getting invented over and over again when predators have this adaptive problem. It's a very simple set of rules that says, okay, I'm going to claim territory by wandering around the outside and dropping stinky stuff at intervals. Okay? And I go around and I refresh my markers occasionally, and you, as another wolf or another wolf, you know that if you cross a live set of markers into somebody else's territory, that's a survival issue for the person, the wolf whose territory you're invading, and they're probably going to fight harder than you are to kick you out. So it's something you better not try unless you're fairly confident that the present inhabitant of the territory is old and weak and ready to die. And conversely, if I venture out of my territory, I know that because I'm in somebody else's territory, the wolf I encounter is likely to fight harder than I will because it's a survival for him, matter for him. And it's possible to both to demonstrate